Many years ago, in the beautiful city of Okigwe, there lived a handsome young boy named Uzoma. Uzoma was the first son of his parents and had a younger sister named Adora. But sadly, their parents had died when Uzoma was only 13 years old. Uzoma and his sister were so broken, they wept non-stop. However, none of their parents' siblings agreed to take them in due to fear that they would not be able to provide for them alongside their own children. So they left them alone. So Uzoma and Adora had to live by themselves and also fend for themselves. But thankfully, they still had a roof over their heads. Although their uncles and aunties neglected them, but they were still kind enough not to take away their father's house from them. Uzoma was in GS3 when his parents died, but he decided to drop out of school so that he could work and provide for his younger sister. So every day, Uzoma would do all sorts of menial jobs, from fetching water and doing manual labor in construction sites to going from home to home to wash people's clothes. Uzoma ran all sorts of errands just so he could make some money to provide for himself and his younger sister. And with the little money that he earned, he used it to cook for his sister and also pay her school fees. Uzoma was a father and also a mother to his only sister Adora. His sister was barely 8 years old when his parents died, so he had to teach her virtually everything, from how to cook to how to sweep and how to take care of herself. Uzoma's childhood was stolen away from him. He had to mature really quickly for the sake of his younger sister. When boys of his age would be busy playing football, Uzoma would be seen carrying load in the market with wheelbarrow. But despite everything that Uzoma had to endure, he was very happy and did not grumble about the responsibility that he had to carry at such a tender age. So things continued like this. In a few years' time, Adora had graduated from secondary school, and this made Uzoma very proud. He had single-handedly trained his sister through secondary school. By this time, Uzoma was already 25 years old and was even more determined to ensure that his sister goes to the university. So a few months later, Adora got admission into the university to study law. Uzoma was excited, although that meant that he had to work 3 times harder. But Uzoma did not mind. He labored day and night under the sun at different construction sites. He would even proudly tell his co-laborers that his sister was studying law in the university. Each time they took breaks from their work to eat, he would say things like, if you see my sister, she's so beautiful and she's also in the university. I'm not just studying any regular course, but law. I can't wait for my sister to graduate and become a lawyer. If any of you as much as argue with me, I will sue you to court. Uzoma would say very proudly and excitedly, and his friends would laugh. But his fellow laborer Emeka would usually reply Uzoma and say, but Uzoma, why did you not sponsor yourself to school? Instead of, sending your sister to school, you're smart, you're hardworking and intelligent. You could have as well sponsored your own education. Why are you slaving away for your sister? What if tomorrow your sister turns around and does not appreciate all of your sacrifices? What will you do then? Emeka asked, looking very worried. Haba, Emeka, why will you think like that? This is my blood sister. Oh. It's my own blood sister. It's my only sibling that you're talking about. Besides, she's my younger sister, so I'm responsible for her. And I know that she's very grateful. She tells me all the time. And I'm definitely sure that she would never turn her back on me. You see me, I will continue to work hard and slave away, if that is what it takes, For my sister to amount to something in life, I really don't care what happens to me. But I will make sure that my sister has a very good life. Emeka replied proudly. So things continued like this. While Emeka worked tirelessly, his sister Adora studied law in the university. As a matter of fact, Adora lacked nothing. Adora even looked better taken care of than people her age whose parents were alive, because her brother did not just pay her school fees, but also made sure to give her enough money to buy fine clothes and shoes so that she would not feel inferior to her mates and be tempted to start sleeping around with men for money. But after 1 year of paying school fees and providing for his sister, Uzoma knew that university education was not as cheap as secondary school education. He was getting very frustrated because despite his best efforts, it was a struggle to provide fully for his sister's university education. He knew for sure that he did not want his sister to drop out of school. Uzoma was worried and would spend all night thinking. Then one day, he suddenly came up with a bright plan. All this while, he and his sister had been living in their father's house. So Uzoma decided to sell his father's house, the only property that his father had left for them, which he was supposed to inherit as of right for being the only son. But he decided to sell it instead and use the money to sponsor his sister's university education. So a few weeks later, Uzoma sold their home for 15 million naira. He put 14 million naira into the bank while he used the other 1 million naira to rent a smaller room for himself and used the remaining balance to start up a restaurant. So Uzoma no longer worked at construction sites, but started selling food at the market, while he used the money he had deposited in the bank to sponsor his sister through her university education and through her law school. So after 5 years, Adora graduated. She graduated with a first class. She was super happy. But Uzoma was even more proud. He stood beside her on her graduation day, feeling like a proud big brother. And a few months later, Adora got a job at one of the top law firms in Lagos. So she had to move to the big city and she started practicing over there. Life was going on just fine for Adora. And in a short while, Adora met a very handsome, young, wealthy man named Afam. Afam was from the upper of the upper class. It was love at first sight for him. Adora was smitten by Afam completely. She loved him so much and loved his money even more. But with the time she spent with Afam, she realized that Afam was very proud and haughty. The way he spoke to waiters when they hung out, and the way he spoke condescendingly to the housemaid or even his driver, one could see that Afam detested poor people. And she was very sure that if not that she was a lawyer who had graduated with a first class, she knew that Afam would not even have looked at her twice because Afam was a classist. But Adora did not mind one bit. She had experienced lack and suffering when her parents died, even though her brother tried his very best. So now that she knew that a wealthy man was interested in her, she was going to grab him with both hands. But Adora had just one worry, which was her only brother Uzoma. Her brother Uzoma was uneducated, unpolished and unrefined. He still ran a restaurant back home in Okigwe. But Adora was scared that if Afa met her brother Uzoma, that he may no longer want to marry her because of how unpolished and unrefined he was. So Adora lied to Afam instead and told him that she was an orphan and that she had no siblings. Adora even went ahead and got married to Afam in a lavish wedding ceremony without informing her brother, and there was no way Uzoma would have found out because he was in Okigwe while Adora was now in the big city. Adora was so happy. She was living like a queen in Afam's house and had maids at her beck and call. Afam was so nice to her and spoiled her silly, giving her so much money even before she asked. Adora even stopped going to work. She became a full-time housewife with only one job description, which was spending her husband's money, her Odogu's money, and answering Nwunye Oga's wife. Meanwhile, Uzoma was very worried. He had noticed that he couldn't reach his sister Adora each time he called her. Her number would not go through, it wouldn't ring. He could only speak to her when she called him, which was once in a blue moon. Uzoma just continued with his life as a food vendor. He was just thankful that his sister was fine. One day, Uzoma sat down in his little room and thought aloud to himself, saying, now that I am done training my sister in school, I think I should take a wife. Uzoma said aloud to himself. So a few months later, he met a beautiful young woman called Ijeoma. Ijeoma was a hairdresser, and Uzoma could not stop gushing about his sister to her. Uzoma fixed his wedding date and tried reaching out to his sister. But as usual, he could not reach her because unknown to him, Adora had blocked his line. But a few weeks later, when Adora remembered to call him, he told her about his upcoming wedding, and Adora promised to come back home to attend the wedding and also to support financially. But a few months later, Uzoma got married to Ijeoma. Yet, neither did his sister send any money or even show up. Uzoma was so worried. He hoped it wasn't what he thought it was. But regardless, he carried on with his life. And before he knew what was happening, 15 years flew by very quickly. And in the whole of that 15 years, Uzoma did not set his eyes on his sister Adora, not even once. He could not reach her. He only spoke to her when Adora called him, which was not very frequent. They had both lived their separate lives. Uzoma was always sad and heartbroken. He wondered why his sister had cut him off. He had even given birth to a son who was already 14 years old, yet his sister had never set his eyes on him. She did not even know him. And on his own end, he barely knew anything about his sister because his sister hid every information from him. She refused to tell him whether she was married or even had any child of her own. But one thing was sure, he knew for a fact that his sister was very wealthy, and he also sensed that his sister was ashamed of him. Sometimes Uzoma remembered what his friend Emeka had warned him about sponsoring his sister's education instead of his own. And for the first time, he realized that Emeka might have been right. He remembered how he spent the best years of his life slaving away for his sister. So Uzoma no longer bothered about his sister. If she calls, fine. If she doesn't call, fine. His focus was on providing for his wife Ijeoma and raising their son Ebuka. So 3 years later, one day, Uzoma was in his restaurant attending to his customers when suddenly a beautiful woman who oozed of class and opulence walked in majestically into the restaurant. Uzoma quickly turned and said, "Welcome, madam. Please, how may we be of help to you? What would you like to eat?" Uzoma asked with a big smile on his face. And immediately, the beautiful young lady went down on her knees and said, "Dedem, my brother, please forgive me. Biko Aram, that is all I want from you." Adora said, crying profusely. And then Uzoma stared at her in shock and said, Adora, Adora, is this really you? I haven't laid my eyes on you in the past 18 years. Where have you been all this while? Uzoma said, tears streaming down his eyes. And immediately, Adora stood up and said, it is me. It is your Adora. I'm so sorry. I know that I do not have any excuse for staying away for the past 18 years, but Bikono, forgive me. Adora replied, crying, and Uzoma immediately hugged his sister. He forgot all the bitterness and resentment he had piled up in his heart. He was just excited to see his baby sister again. He took his sister to his simple home and they spent hours and hours discussing and catching up on old times. Adora even got to meet her brother's only son, whose name was Ebuka, who at this time was a young man. He was 18 years old. Adora spent a few days in her brother's house. They had buried the hatchet, and as a sign of good faith, she offered to take her nephew Ebuka to Lagos with her so that he could get to meet his cousins and bond with them for some few weeks. Ebuka was so happy. He had never been to Lagos before. So a few days later, Ebuka traveled to Lagos with his auntie, his father's only sister. He was so happy to see how rich and wealthy his auntie was. And he looked around her house in awe and admiration. But to his surprise, none of his supposed cousins were around. His auntie told him that they had traveled out of the country and would be back in a few days. Ebuka spent a few days in the house feeling like a big boy. He literally had maids at his beck and call who were serving him hands and foot. But a few days later, his auntie Adora told him to please follow her to the hospital, that she had an appointment with her doctor. And a few days after that, Ebuka found himself lying on the floor by the roadside with people gathered around him. He could not remember anything. He was thereafter rushed to the hospital by some good Samaritans. The doctor spoke to him, but he was not able to remember anything. But thankfully, he could remember his father's phone number. So the doctor placed a call to his father, telling him that his son was sick and that he needed to come over to Lagos immediately. Uzoma was very shocked. Sick? Eh? How is my son sick? But even if he is sick, why is it not my sister Dora, or at least my son, that is calling to inform me? Why is it a total stranger? Something must be wrong. Uzoma said aloud to himself, looking very scared. So later that day, he packed a few things and left for Lagos. Upon getting to Lagos, he went straight to the hospital and was shocked to see his own son, his only child Ebuka, lying on the hospital bed and looking very weak and frail. Uzoma immediately turned to the doctor looking very scared, tears already streaming down his eyes, and said, "Doctor, what happened? What happened to my son?" Uzoma asked, fidgeting. "I'm so sorry, sir, but it seems that one of your son's kidneys was harvested and he was handled poorly. So he has some infections that looks really bad. We do not think he will make it past 48 hours." The doctor said very sadly. "Eh? Whose kidney? My own son. Kidney stolen. How? Where? Hey, who did I offend?" Uzoma wailed loudly. "But where is my sister? She should be here," Uzoma said as she tried calling his sister. But yet again, her number was unreachable. And just then, it dawned on him that it might just have been his sister that stole his son's kidney. If not, she should be here. And it began to make sense to Uzoma. He began to think, why did his sister Adora suddenly show up after 18 years and then took his only child, his son, in the guise that she wanted to introduce him to his cousins? And immediately he screamed and said, Adora, Adora Ebola Mo, Adora, you have killed me. Oh, so after slaving away for years to send you to school, and you even abandoned me, oh, but that one was not enough for you. You still came back for my only child, the only eyes that I used to see, and you took his kidney. Ah, Adora. So, Adora, I and my son are just tools. Like we are just body parts, slaves for your own advancement. Adora, God will punish you. God will punish you. But Uzoma, why were you a fool? I was a fool to have believed her. Now see where my foolishness has landed me. See my son. Uzoma said, wailing profusely. He stayed by his son's bedside, praying, crying, and begging God to please heal him. He could not afford to lose his only child. But barely 20 hours later, Ebuka gave up the ghost. Ebuka died. Uzoma broke down, crying and wailing. So later that day, he gathered himself and went to report to the police station. When he got there, he showed them a picture of his sister and told them her name, Adora. When the police officers saw the picture, they shrieked in fear and said, Oga, we no fit arrest this one, no. This woman a big woman now. Her husband, Afam, is one of the billionaires in Lagos, the movers and shakers of Lagos. If we try it, we will lose our jobs. As in today. So Oga, abeg, carry your problem, dey go. We no fit do anything. One of the police officers replied. Uzoma was very frustrated. He spent his days weeping and crying. And so after a few days, he decided to go back home to Okigwe. He narrated every single thing to his wife, Ijeoma, who also broke down in tears. Meanwhile, Adora, his sister, was busy enjoying herself in Lagos. Her son, Okafor, was getting better. She sat by his bedside in their luxurious home, tending to her sick son. Since she stole her nephew's kidney and had it transplanted to her son was recovering and doing just fine. And life continued happily for her as if nothing happened. But one day, Adora was seated in her home when suddenly she started acting strangely. She began acting like a mad person. Not even her children or husband could hold her. So she ran out of the house. Afam tried his best to find his wife, but no one could find her. So a few days later, Uzoma was sitting in front of his restaurant, looking frustrated. And then he saw a mad woman patrolling in front of his street. He recognized her immediately. It was his only sister, his baby sister, the one he had loved and cared for many years, the one that had taken his youth, sweat, and even more recently, his only child's kidney and life. He stared at her in defeat. He knew why she was mad, because he had cursed her. So Uzoma lived out the rest of his days in sadness and frustration, while his sister remained mad and continued to linger in front of the shop. She never went anywhere else. How she even trekked from Lagos to Okigwe is a different story on its own. But all through her days of being mad, she always hovered around her brother's shop. Sometimes, when she came inside to beg for food, Uzoma would pursue his mad sister out of his shop with a cane. He hated her so much and wished that he hadn't spent his whole life living for his sister and trying to better her life. Hi besties, it's your favorite storyteller, Omalicha. Thank you so much for watching my story to the end. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you think that Adora deserved how she ended, like to run mad? Then secondly, do you think that Uzoma was also quite foolish? Like how would someone that you have not seen for the past 18 years come and suddenly takes your child away and you allow it? Then a personal question for you is, Would you have done the same thing that Afam did? Like, can you sacrifice for your sibling to the extent that you have to pause your own education, pause your own life for your sibling? Would you do that? Please share your thoughts with me in the comment section, and please support your home girl, Omalicha, by subscribing to my channel, liking my videos, and sharing it to your loved ones. So now, till I come your way again with more interesting stories, bye!